Це ваше прізвище?
Я не бачу, що ви мені показуєте.
Ну, подивіться. Ну, так подивіться, от.
This is the kind of journalism Ukrainian reporters at investigative outlet Bihus.info do. They keep a close eye on the country's rich and powerful.
Я нічого не буду коментувати. Я нічого не знаю.
However, last December, the journalists were the ones being watched. The team had gathered in a hotel for a training workshop and became the targets of a major surveillance operation conducted by Ukraine's intelligence services. It was only when a little-known YouTube channel posted video and audio recordings in January that the journalists realized what had happened. The material suggested they'd been using illegal drugs and questioned whether they could be trusted.
Відео неприємне, так. Але давайте відверто. Якщо воно і несе чомусь загрозу, то хіба що здоров'ю учасників, аж ніяк не українській державності.
The incident prompted Bihus to launch its own investigation into how and why this surveillance was carried out.
Вони все зробили.
They've done everything out in the open, leaving an incredible amount of evidence on the hotel's CCTV. Overall, there were 30 people involved in this operation. Before we arrived, they came to install their gadgets, rented the cottages, installed surveillance, even in the sauna.
Йо! Так точно!
A week later, they came back to remove it all. So it was a massive operation by the security services.
Це не те, що там стеження за журналістами.
It's not that we're surprised by the surveillance or pressure. We keep an eye on the authorities, they keep an eye on us. But when the special services deploy a huge amount of resources to monitor a team of journalists at a time when we're at a full-scale war, that feels like intimidation.
Це було не просто там стеження, бо
It
стеження...
wasn't just surveillance. Based on the phone conversations, we know they also wiretapped us for more than a year.
Більше року.
The story triggered an uproar within the journalistic community in Ukraine. But the targeting of Bihus wasn't an isolated event. Other journalists have been harassed both on and offline. The editors of national newspapers and online publications issued a joint statement and even met with ambassadors of G7 countries, asking the diplomats to pressure President Zelensky to denounce the attacks.
Будь-який тиск на журналістів неприпустимий.
Zelensky fired the chief of the intelligence department responsible for the surveillance of Bihus. A government investigation is underway, but the story exposed deep tensions between the president and the Ukrainian fourth estate.
When the war started, there was an unspoken agreement among journalists to not criticize the Ukrainian authorities. All of the anti-corruption investigations stopped. But eventually, we realized that people want to hear the truth about whether someone is profiteering from the war, if corruption is taking place, if authorities are making competent decisions.
Ukrainians demand diverse sources of information. That is why opposition media such as Bihus.info and independent media are mega popular, and at times more popular than the media outlets that the government had authorized. There is competition on Telegram too, and the government is trying to create a space on Telegram that works for them. But we also see how certain anonymous Telegram channels are used to discredit journalists and members of civil society.
We're being cast as enemies of the Ukrainian people. We're called Russian agents. That's very dangerous, because we hold a pro-Ukraine position, but also believe the government needs to be held accountable. There's little transparency, but it's clear that all of this is happening to those who criticize the government or military leadership.
Війна. Нема більше обговорення загальних речей.
We see that the authorities react quite nervously to criticism and some actions of journalists.
Ця тема вичерпана.
Despite the many restrictions all journalists in Ukraine face, investigative outlets are now tackling uncomfortable topics like corruption, mobilization, and troop losses on the battlefield.
Україна витрачає мільярди гривень під час війни на утримування суддів у відставці.
But these stories remain largely outside the mainstream news agenda. This is the United News TV Marathon, a rolling news bulletin that is comprised of 6 national channels that came together at the start of Russia's invasion in 2022. Now, 2 years later, those channels are still broadcasting the exact same thing, churning out messages that come with the government's seal of approval.
The United Marathon was a response to the invasion when none of the channels had the capacity to provide 24/7 news broadcasting. It was necessary to very quickly find a format that would provide a verified source of information with minimal opportunity for Russia to interfere.
It's becoming more of a PR exercise for the authorities, a tool to calm society and shield people from the real state of things. There's a place for state propaganda during the war, but there also needs to be a balance. Only one channel, Suspilna TV, gives some voice to the opposition. Otherwise, the marathon is almost void of opposing views. And it's obvious that some inconvenient topics were censored.
Отже, парламентський телеканал.
Many journalists have questioned the format, editorial policy, and government's expenditure on the United News TV Marathon.
Йдеться про компанію «Кінокіт».
An investigation by Bihus published in March dug into the ownership structure and funding of the company producing content shown on TV Marathon.
Один з телеканалів, який має там
One of the TV channels that has a 6-hour broadcast slot on United News is the State Parliament TV channel. It does not produce its own content, but pays a private production company a significant amount of state funds.
Чому взагалі важливо
Our assumption is that this company is close to the president's entourage. But you could ask, why is it important to talk about this production house at all? Well, it's because they produce content that Ukrainians watch around the clock.
суспільство українці цілодобово.
Я абсолютно впевнений, що
I'm absolutely confident that those in power would like to totally dominate the media space, replace all TV output with the marathon, and spread their message all over the internet. They're trying, but I doubt that they can achieve the result they desire.
а вона не може контролювати.
Ukrainian media can't be controlled. We have a backbone and can think for ourselves.
Підкачали, значить, і дають собі раду.
In recent weeks, President Zelensky has toughened his stance on anonymous social media trolls, many of whom have gone after journalists. He has pushed for more regulation and transparency. In February, when Zelensky held a press conference, his tone towards journalists was more conciliatory.
Я вам вдячний за підтримку, за те, що говорите правду.
But with the ongoing threat from Russia and dwindling aid and media attention from the West, Ukraine's government is keenly aware that inconvenient stories about corruption and scandals may hinder their cause. Ukraine's investigative journalists say the task of keeping the country's image spotless cannot happen at the cost of transparency and the truth.
We're not enemies of the Ukrainian authorities. We're partners. But we're also demanding partners, and we have a mission. We're careful with our criticism and voice it only when it is impossible to stay quiet, when our society, our victory, our democratic development is under threat.
Насправді розслідування це про
Investigative journalism is not about digging dirt. It's about making the case for something to change. We want everyone involved in this surveillance scandal to be brought to justice, so it wouldn't happen again. Democratic Ukraine should not live like this, because we're not Russia.
Thanks for watching. Now hit that like button and leave us a comment to let us know what you think about anything that we covered this week. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Does anyone really call it X? Facebook and Instagram for updates from the show. Links are in the description.